So hold that thought for a minute. I want to bring in Joseph Scott Morgan, certified death investigator, also professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University. Joe Morgan, every time you say something on this show, I stop and I listen, because it's the forensic, microscopic clues that the layperson doesn't know about that can often trip up a killer. And tonight you've got yet another one of these forensic moments, forensic science issues that could be the linchpin in this case. We thought of Alexa, and we thought of the iPhone, and we thought of all sorts of things, but we didn't think about how blood pools in the body and how time can tell you an incredible tale. I want to start with something that most of us don't know. It's livor mortis, not rigor mortis. It's livor mortis, and it's what happens inside your body with your blood when you die. Can you just give me the really quick Reader's Digest explanation of what happens with livor mortis?
Sure, Ash. Our vessels in our body are not intended to store blood. They're there to essentially transport blood. And what happens when we pass away, our blood will literally settle to the lowest point of gravity. In this particular case, let's say, for instance, we had somebody that was lying on their back. If we had someone that was lying on their back for a protracted period of time, the blood would pool in that area. Liquid always seeks the lowest point of gravity. And in that,
do you know what? I do have a picture of that, but before I put it up, I just need to let our viewers who get a little squeamish. I need you to know that what we're going to show you is actually a cadaver. This is a cadaver used in science. This was something studied at the University, Indiana University. And so the picture you're seeing is of a person that seems to show exactly what you're telling us. Joe, can you see your monitor and explain it?
Yeah, absolutely. I should be glad to. That purple area that you're seeing there detailed in this image is actually the settling or the pooling of blood in that particular area. Those white kind of blanched out areas that you see there, just think about it this way. Those areas are the areas of contact where the body, the entire weight of the body is being essentially supported in those particular areas. Pressure points. You're absolutely right.
So,
yeah.
So now, why I'm getting into this is not because it's fascinating science, but this actually can give you a timeline, because all of this happens. It begins to show in the first 20 to 30 minutes after you die, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. And that's one of the reasons, as a medical legal death investigator, a former medical legal death investigator, I'm so heavily dependent upon livor mortis, because it's only gravitationally dependent. It's not dependent upon environmental temperatures. Gravity is pretty much constant everywhere in our world.
Okay, so, and you call it livor mortis. I think I called it livor mortis. It's my bad, right?
No. Some people say postmortem lividity as well. So,
okay. I knew about lividity, yeah. So, well, I'll call it livor mortis because that's your term. But here's where it gets extremely interesting to this case.
Yeah.
If it begins showing up 20 to 30 minutes after you die, it actually locks in and stops in the pattern, which will be its final pattern after about 8 to 10 hours. Is that correct? It's fixed at that time?
Yeah, people are always asking us, how do we tell time since death or postmortem interval? And the fascinating thing about this is a static marker that we have, Ash. It goes out to about 8 to 10 hours, and then it is fixed into that specific area, the interstitial tissue, where it has kind of bled out into the surrounding tissue. And once it's there, it's there. It's not going anywhere unless the body is moved prior to fixation.
Okay, so now help me through, and this is a little morbid, but it's germane to the story that Chris has, according to police, told them, that sometime around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, he woke up, had an emotional conversation, went downstairs, came back up, saw something terrible on the baby monitor, one of his children dead and sprawled out on the bed, and saw Shanann strangling the other baby, and then went and strangled her. So if all of this has happened around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we can only presume that there was a moment of breath catching. And again, all of this is if Chris's story is true. There's a moment of breath catching. There's a moment of planning. There's a moment of preparation of these bodies, which are now dead. And within 20 to 30 minutes, the blood pooling is starting. And they are not standing up. They are lying down in some way. Then they are loaded onto his truck. They're in the bed of the pickup truck for at least a 45-minute drive. Okay, Joe? You're still with me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
The camera of the neighbor saw that truck pulling out at 5:30 in the morning. 45 minutes later, if he went right to the grave site, the work site, it would be 6:15. So sometime between 4 a.m. and 6:15, we now have these bodies lying in some formation. Does it matter if they were laid in different formations? Somewhere in the house, then in preparation, then into the truck, then unloaded from the truck, awaiting their spot of burial. Does that matter?
Yeah, it could. You'll get initial onset. Let's just say, for instance, and I don't know this, but let's just say, for instance, the children were laying face up for a period of time. He had them laying on the floor in the home. He takes the children, lays them on their back in the back of the bed of the truck, and then he takes them. Remember, we're not talking about 8 to 10 hours here now. This is prior to fixation. You will begin to have sudden onset of postmortem lividity. He drives to the location and then takes the children and places them into this vat. Again, we don't know how deep it is.
Wait, before you get to the oil,
yeah.
If the children are in one position in the home,
yes, ma'am,
and then they're loaded into the truck in another position, is that 2 places on the body that will show this livor mortis?
Yes, it can be. It'll be more pronounced. It'll be more pronounced in the area in which they're dependently positioned. So you will have an initial onset, and then the position they finally wind up in, they'll be presenting like that.
So there should be an initial one, because they were lying in that house at some point.
Yes.
Probably for more than 20 minutes, right?
Yes,
it would take that long.
That's correct.
At least to get them, prepared, or at least for the killing of Shanann. So there'll be some onset in the house, then presumably not an exact position in the truck. So there'll be a secondary onset of livor mortis if Chris's story is true.
Yes.
Then perhaps a third if they're brought out of the truck and put on the ground, and each one is carried up to an oil tank separately, right? It's possible there'll be a third, maybe not, but possible. But here's the big question. If it sticks at 8 to 10 hours,
right,
once they go into the oil, they will float face first, correct? No matter what, you tend to turn face down in any kind of liquid that you're suspended in, correct?
Yes, the dead do. That's why it's referred to, forgive me, but as a dead man's float. They will float face down, essentially. And you will get in kind of this liquid environment. I've seen this many times, particularly if the body is non-supported, it's just free floating. It kind of skews the way gravity affects the body. So you'll get this odd kind of line that appears on the body. And this is key for us in this particular case, because the demonstration that they would have seen at the scene for lividity will be this odd displacement of lividity in the dependent area.
Okay, so here's what's critical.
Yes.
Not so much for Shanann, because she ended up in a grave, and she would have been static as if she were in a truck or a grave. That's where the gravity is going.
Yes.
But for those children, if there is no flotation livor mortis indication, meaning that 8 to 10 hour window ended before they were in the oil.
Yes.
You following me?
Oh, yeah, you bet I am.
They've been dead for longer than 8 to 10 hours before they're suspended in that oil. There's no way Shanann could have killed them, because she didn't get home till 2 a.m.
Yes, that is correct. And one of the things I want to know as an investigator, and I really want to peg this down, Ash, is how long did he have control over these little angels' bodies? How long did he have control over them while they were alive? At what point? And we need to be able to measure this. And this will have taken place at the scene, as well as hopefully at the morgue as well.
So I want to be crystal clear. If these little girls were killed on Sunday instead of Monday, when he tells us they were killed by Shanann, we will be able to tell. Because if they don't have those particular signs of livor mortis that you can only get when suspended in liquid, then it is impossible that Chris Watts' story is true. It is impossible that Shanann Watts could have killed them. She is seen coming home at 2 a.m., and they would have possibly, they can only, if I'm doing the math correctly, if they were killed any time before 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night on Sunday, then it is impossible that Shanann did it.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, I would concur with your assessment on that. Yeah, it's within the realm of possibility, and I think that they need to look very hard. And I'm really wondering if this is why this information has not been released yet, because they're trying to be as thorough as possible.
Thank you for that, because even if the ME completely screwed up and didn't look for that livor mortis pattern, they always photograph these bodies. They always have that for posterity.
Yes.
Even though those little babies have been buried, that evidence will still exist, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Wow, that's amazing. I knew it. I knew you would have these answers. Thank you, Joe, for that.
You bet.
And there's still so much more. There's still so many other questions. Even if you can get the science to prove who did or didn't do this, there's always the why. And science is never going to tell you motive. But there are some other things that will. And we've culled through hours and hours of Facebook videos of Shanann Watts and this family. And it is crystal clear that Shanann and her kids were dealing with a lot of health issues. So this starts to really beg the question, could the stress and the impact of those health issues and all the cost that it takes to look after little kids when they're in the hospital, could it take a toll on a father and a husband and a breadwinner? Talk about that next.